Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I have a very special tag for you today. Is the storybook original tag by Sir Rainbow Skychild or Kelly, and I was for the first time in ages tagged by someone. I was tagged by JD Estrada. Thank you JD for the tag, and you should definitely check both their channels. I will leave the link in the description down below. First of all, before we begin, if you haven't met me already, my name is Alina. I'm an author and I post videos on books and writing. Also, I must apologize for the poor lighting. I don't know what happened today. It's freaking Saturday. I had nothing major going on, but I just completely forgot it would get dark so soon. So the day kind of just got away from me, and I'm filming now, and it's late, and it's dark, and I have coffee. I always have coffee. So, what's the storybooks tag about? Well, the storybooks tag is, as the title says it, a tag where you tell stories about books. It's not books you've written, it's books you've read, but that have a particular story. And to start us off today, I'm going with Woman in the Dunes by Kobo Abe, who is a Japanese writer. And this has a very long and intricate story. I first heard of this book when I was about 10 or 11. And if you know anything about me from previous interviews or tags I've done, or reading the Lover's Journey series and running across a character called Robert the Romanian, well, you know that I had a crush on a boy when I was that age, who I'd only meet at my grandmother's when I was there on holiday. And I've credited Robert for a lot of things. First of all, boosting my love of reading, because there weren't any other kids at my grandma's that read as much as Robert and I did. And also for being the first one that I wrote a novel with. We wrote a story together, which was crap and actually was pretty much the never-ending story, but stolen. I didn't know that because I hadn't seen the movie. So after that summer, I found writing longer stories so rewarding that I continued to write on my own. I was 10 at the time and I never looked back. So this book is somehow also connected to Robert, because we used to go to the village's library and borrow books together. And he found this book. Of course, it wasn't this cover, it was an older print and it looked a bit shabby. But he took it and read it, and he was telling me about it, and I found nothing fascinating about it. I don't know, I was reading iRobot and other such stories at the time, and those were fascinating to me. This was just like, this is kind of literary fiction. You couldn't pay me to read this. I remember the name of the book though, and later on we didn't see each other for a very long time, and I was in secondary school, so I was in my teens at the time, pre-teens to teens, and I missed him terribly because it wasn't as fun without him there, because, you know, the other kids didn't exactly share my interests. So I'd go to the library and check out books, and one day I found this one on a shelf, and I took it home with me and I tried to read it, and I didn't find it extremely appealing at the time either. I don't know why, it just wasn't speaking to me. And then I bought this copy. I hope I wrote on it when I bought it, because I usually do that. Nope, no I didn't. So why would you, Alina? Why would you do anything useful at any point in time? Let me see if I can find out when it was printed. Oh, this is from 2004, so it was in about my final year of university. I found this book and bought it and read it and loved it. And maybe for once Robert was right and I was just too young when I was 10 to understand this book. But yeah, that's the story with this one. Then we have How to Be Good by Nick Hornby. And as you can see from how it looks, it had its adventures, and oh well, let me tell you the story. So this goes back to where I started writing in English, actually, because as I told you before, I went on a writing retreat where the coaches were, you know, from the UK originally. One of them was staying in Sardinia. The writing retreat took place in Sardinia, and I went there, and it was fascinating. And one of the ladies who was on this retreat had this book with her. And I'm just not mentioning her because I'm not sure if she's okay with that, and we haven't spoken in a while, so... But she's a brilliant filmmaker, and she was working on a script at that point, which later became a movie, by the way. And she had this book. She picked it up in her travels because she was traveling around the world at that point, and she was done with it, and she passed it on to me. And my plan for this book was to send it off to other people so that more could read it, but then disaster hit, as you can see here. My dog, by the way, the book has a dog on the cover. I'm not sure if you can see it because of the stupid light, but anyway, my dog, her name was Kayla, got a hold of this. She didn't often do this, but she did it to my book. And I was super upset at the time, but now this is one of the few memories I still have of her, so I don't care anymore. But yeah, this is the story of this book. Moving on. This is Relentless by Simon Koenig. And the story about this is that it sucked to have no Kindle. This was a pre-Kindle book. So the story with it is that I was on holiday in Turkey. We were in Oludeniz, and I was supposed to be there for 3 weeks. So I thought 3 weeks, 3 books should be sufficient, because I was planning on, you know, going to the beach, going paragliding, driving around, doing all those fun stuff. Which I did. But then I ran out of books. I finished all 3 books in my first week, so I was thinking I had no chance of ever finding any books in Oludeniz because I don't read Turkish, and I didn't imagine they had books in Romanian or English for that matter. But then again, the special thing about Oludeniz is that it's one of those resorts where most tourists come from the UK. It was so predominantly UK as a destination that they had prices in Turkish lira and in British pounds. So one day we were strolling through Oludeniz, and we find this stand in front of a shop which I didn't even check, but they were selling second-hand books. And this was the one I saw first and bought first, and I also got an English copy of Taipan and a collection of short stories featuring Poirot by Agatha Christie. So I got 3 more books. This was the first one I read. I finished it quite quickly, and then Taipan and the Poirot stories followed. But this is the one I most associate with that trip, and it was a good lesson of always bringing more books than you think you'll read. A couple of years later, I'm not really sure how many, I think 2 or 3 years later I got my first Kindle, and that was bliss for me, because when I traveled I could bring as many books as I wanted and they wouldn't weigh me down. So yeah, that's the story of this book. And now we get into the creepy. This cover doesn't tell you much because it's something my father put on the book, because there were some really, as you see, kind of poor paperbacks, and they get super discolored in time. They weren't very well made. As you can see, the font was super tiny, and I'm trying to find when this was printed. Okay, 1978. This book is a collection of Turkish fairy tales, and it was the creepiest thing I ever read. Let me see if the one I'm thinking of is it's actually the first story. I don't care about the foreword, thank you very much. Take me to the first story. Oh no, now we have some history before the stories begin. I'm sorry about that. Okay, There it is. Okay. No, it's not the first one. I'm sorry. One of these stories, anyway, I was reading before bed. I was super young because I started reading when I was about 5, maybe a little earlier. And I finished my From the Polar Bear book. I finished the Jungle book and whatever other children's book I had. And then I saw this and I thought, oh, fairy tales should work great. And I started reading this and I read one of them before bed. I'm not sure I was in school. I think I was 5 or 6 years old. I'm thinking 6 years old. My father was working the night shift and he went to work at around 10 p.m. 11 p.m. So I start reading before he goes to work. And I read about this guy who dug up a corpse from a secret tomb he had and started eating his liver. And that's when it got... No, I was terrified, and then I wouldn't let my father go until he came and told me some jokes and made me laugh and whatever, because I was terrified to go to bed and he was going to work. And sure, my mom was home, but no, I ran to daddy like a daddy's little girl that I was. So yes, kids, whenever you see fairy tales, make sure your parents check them first, because you never know. I certainly didn't. Do you think the books falling right now was just ghosts talking to me because I'm into the spooky shit, or I'm just clumsy and I don't know how physics works? We'll see. Okay, so now we get into the creepiest of creepiest, and it was the weirdest experience I ever had related to a book. And it has to do with this series. This is by a Romanian author, his name is Mircea Cărtărescu, and the series is called Orbitori in Romanian, and they translated it in English as something like glaring, but I think blinding would be a better option, because glaring just doesn't have the same undertone of a light so bright that you can't see anything. So the books are the left wing, the body, the right wing, and this makes up the body of a butterfly, because the butterfly is one of the symbols that's used very much in this book, along with others. This is, I wouldn't know how to explain this book. It's surreal and amazing and great, and I wouldn't want to be the one paid to write a blurb for this one, because I just wouldn't know how to do it justice. So the story in question has to do with the first book, I think, if I'm not remembering it wrong. It's either the first book, so the left wing, or the body. I'm not sure, I can't remember, it was such a long time ago. But the thing is, I was reading this book, and before I go into the story, I need to give you some context. Black people are not common in Romania. It's not me being racist, it's just a reality. There are a lot of people of color, but they're usually brown. They're either from the Middle East or closer by, like Turkey, which part of it is still in Europe until you get to Istanbul. But plus we have the Roma community, but black people are not something very common. To better explain this context, my friend Jacques was the only black guy in our entire school throughout middle school and high school. So it wasn't really common. It was common for them to be more present in university cities like Bucharest and Iași, and even in Ploiești, because that's how Jacques' parents met. His father came here to study at the local university. But it wasn't a population that you'd call more than a minority, like really small minority. It's more prevalent now, I think. After the revolution, I think more people came here to study or to live, and it's a lot more prevalent in Bucharest, but this was in my first or second year of university, so it wasn't that much. I think we had 1 or 2 black students in our dorm, and that was a bit much compared to everywhere else. So you could say black people weren't common in Bucharest, and very special black people think something like a black person with violet eyes would have been a lot rarer because, you know, there were so few, it wasn't enough room for all these exceptions. So let's get into the story. I was reading this book. I was in a tram that's mentioned in this book, on a street that's heavily mentioned in this book, and I was just passing the area where the author of this book had been living as a child. And I started reading this story about a guy in New Orleans. He was a black man, but not any kind of black man. He was an albino black man. I don't know how many of them are, but I'd say it's a minority. So I read the story about this voodoo sort of guy. There was some magic undertones to it and some ritual they were going to perform, and I read about this albino guy. So then, as I was reading about this very particular man, I lift my head and my eyes fall on a black albino guy who was looking right at me. It was the creepiest thing ever. It was like I had a character from the book just pop up in reality in front of me, where there was maybe 1 in a million chances of that exact thing to happen in that exact tram at that time while I was reading that exact page. So I was kind of frozen in place, and I'm pretty sure my eyes were bulging out and I was pale as fuck, and I pray to this day I didn't make that guy feel uncomfortable. He was much younger than the character in the book, I'll give you that, but other than that it was freakish as hell. And I was like, what am I going to see next? I mean, I'm reading some creepy shit in this book. I wouldn't want to see that, I don't think. So yeah, I think that's perfect for a Halloween story, if you ask me. And I know I've mentioned this story a few times and people were looking at me like I was making it up, but I really wasn't. It was not something that kept happening to me. It was a one-time thing, and it was so coincidental and creepy that it stayed with me, and I don't think I will ever forget that. And speaking of that, I probably should reread this series again if I can find it in an ebook format, because it's absolutely brilliant. So yeah, that's my tag. As always, if you've enjoyed the tag and would like to do it, consider yourself tagged. And to let me know in the comments down below what you thought of my stories and the tag and the books I've shown you. And do the normal thing you do, which is liking and sharing the video and subscribing if you haven't already. I shall see you all tomorrow and probably film at a better time where the video doesn't look that crappy. That's it from me for now. I shall see you tomorrow. Bye!